Hi there, I'm Josiah Black. I'm pastor at First Baptist Church, Peru, and this is our ongoing study of the book of Micah. And today we'll be finishing up chapter 4 by looking at verses 9 through 13. It's a little bigger chunk than we kind of normally do in this, but this kind of concludes chapter 4, and it introduces some new concepts and ideas, or rather reiterates some concepts and ideas that are important. So let's hear the book of Micah, chapter 4, verses 9 to 13. Why do you now cry aloud? Have you no king? Has your ruler perished that pain seizes you like that of a woman in labor? Writhe in agony, daughter Zion, like a woman in labor, for now you must leave the city to camp in the open field. You will go to Babylon, there you will be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you out of the hands of your enemies. But now many nations are gathered against you. They say, let her be defiled, let her eyes gloat over Zion. But they do not know the thoughts of the Lord. They do not understand his plan, that he has gathered them like sheaves to the threshing floor. Rise and thresh, daughter Zion, for I will give you horns of iron, I will give you hooves of bronze, and you will break to pieces many nations. You will devote their ill-gotten gains to the Lord, their wealth to the Lord of all the earth. So those are verses 9 through 13. And if you recall from the previous part of 4, we were looking at this sort of celebratory thing. It was kind of a tone shift. And this seems to be almost a shift back to earlier parts where there might be some lamentation here. There might be some sadness. But I want to look at a few things with you. First of all, let's look at verses 9 and 10. And just to reread those, it says, why do you now cry aloud? Have you no king? Has your ruler perished? The pain seizes you like that of a woman in labor. Writhe in agony, daughter Zion, like a woman in labor, for now you must leave the city to camp in the open field. You will go to Babylon, and there you will be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you out of the hands of your enemies. Okay, so first of all, this is Micah telling the people of Judah that the bad stuff's coming. All right, we've talked about this a few times before now, but basically Micah is reiterating, hey, I've just told you this really good stuff, but the pain is coming. There is going to be a tough season. There's going to be a hard period. He sort of opens it by asking them why are they crying, and the tone here isn't really mockery. It's sort of intended as an acknowledgement of what's going on right now. So in some ways Mike is affirming the voices that he's probably hearing around him that are lamenting the things that are happening, because things are going to be bad. As a matter of fact, chapter 10, or verse 10, really goes into detail about this, where Micah says, writhe in agony, daughter Zion, like a woman in labor. So basically, it's okay to lament. It's appropriate to lament, because you're going to leave the city to camp in the open field. Now that's metaphor, and it's sort of on the nose. The idea here is that they're going to be carried away from the land that they know, which would be the city. That's kind of the thing that Micah's trying to capture. They're going to be carried from the city away to the open field. So he's talking about exile, and he doubles down on that by saying, you will go to Babylon. But he gives them some encouragement too, packaged with that. Because he says, you'll go to Babylon, there you will be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you out of the hands of your enemies. So basically Micah is saying that, hey, all the good stuff that I told you that God has planned and is coming is on the other side of this really hard experience. And it's going to happen. It's coming your way now. It's coming soon. The wheels are sort of already in motion. So just be prepared for that and know that it's going to get bad before it gets good. But the Lord will redeem you out of the hands of your enemies. Verse 11 is Micah sort of moving the camera, if you will, to the perspective of the nations that are sort of around them. Now this would apply to Babylon, which they're going to be this sort of primary antagonist here who's going to carry them off. But there are other nations that are also sort of against Israel in this equation. And so verse 11 just sort of describes their posture towards Judah, towards the people of Israel. It says, but now many nations are gathered against you. They say, let her be defiled, let our eyes gloat over Zion. And it's basically this idea that the other nations in the region are going to rejoice at the fall of this. And there are a lot of reasons for that, both cultural conflicts that go back, the fact that Israel being sort of out of the way creates economic opportunities for these other nations. So there's sort of a lot of reasons they're happy. It's not necessarily just a we're against God thing, although I think that's probably the case. A lot of these tribes, it's sort of very tribal society, so their military victory means also a triumph for their sort of false gods as well, or at least so they think. So there's a lot sort of woven into 11, but the idea here is that they're going to be pretty pleased with this idea that Israel's kind of on its way out and that the bad things are happening to it. Of course, Micah flips that on its head and says immediately in verse 12, "But they do not know the thoughts of the Lord. They do not understand his plan, that he has gathered them like sheaves to the threshing floor." And so that's verse 12. And the idea here is that these folks don't fully understand the plan that God has formed. And that, in fact, because of their posture, because of their being against God and against the people of God, they're going to be essentially stomped in one way or another, sort of processed. There's an outcome that they're not going to see coming because of this posture that they've taken. They don't understand the plan of God. They don't get it. So Micah in verse 13 goes on to say, "Rise and thresh, daughter Zion, for I will give you horns of iron, I will give you hooves of bronze, and you will break to pieces many nations. You will devote their ill-gotten gains to the Lord, their wealth to the Lord of all the earth." So this is Micah kind of saying, for a while, you're going to be carried off, you're going to be broken up, and all these nations in this area are going to sort of assume that it's game over, that it's done. But what's actually going to happen is God's going to pull off this incredible reversal. And you, daughter Zion, which is sort of God's affectionate term for these people, the Hebrew people, you are going to be giving horns of iron and hooves of bronze, which both are symbols of strength, symbols of power, and you are going to break to pieces many nations. Now, what's interesting about this is, of course, this is where the sort of Israeli people, the Judean people, sort of began to get the idea that when God sort of flips things for them, it's going to be a military victory. This is where they start to imagine that it's going to be like this sort of worldwide kingdom of Israel, and those ideas start to come into play. And of course, as Christians, we know that when God ultimately fulfilled these prophecies, or began to fulfill these prophecies in the person of Jesus Christ, he came in a form they didn't expect. So this is one of those passages where later when we talk about Messiah, and when Israel began to imagine what its Messiah would look like, they, for many reasons, but also verses like this, they imagine that this is going to be a military, political leader who's going to sort of usher in this kingdom at which we will be the head. And of course, we know now as Christians that there's a spiritual aspect to all this stuff, and that yes, there'll be kingdoms that are broken and that fall, but it's primarily not going to be an earthly military victory in the way that these folks might have imagined it at the time. So it gets a little complicated in terms of interpretation, but the idea here, the most prescient upfront idea though for these people who are about to be carried off from their homeland is that God has a plan. He's going to restore you, and you're going to be given sort of power and authority over these other nations that right now are gloating over your apparent fall. So that's Micah 4, verses 9 through 13. And obviously there's a lot there, but it's pretty clear, honestly, as far as Bible stuff goes. It's not particularly symbolic in a way that makes it hard for us to understand. This should be pretty easy to read and get what's kind of going on here and what this next movement that Micah's kind of predicting is going to be. So anyway, thank you for joining. We'll be back next week, and we'll start Micah chapter 5, and there'll be discussion questions below, so make sure you answer those, and I will see you soon.